The wind always seemed harsher on the Turner Ranch. It carried dust instead of rain, and it whistled through the broken fences like a warning to anyone fool enough to keep fighting for land the earth had already turned its back on. Ethan Turner leaned against the corral post, hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the late afternoon sun. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hands raw from fixing fence wire that snapped as if mocking his efforts. The drought had been merciless that year. Grass shriveled, cattle grew thin, and the bank notices piled higher on his kitchen table. He was 26 years old and already looked worn thin, shoulders stooped under more than just labor. Folks in town whispered about the poor Turner boy, that he'd inherited land too stubborn to yield and a pride too strong to let it go. But Ethan wasn't stubborn, not really. He was just desperate. The sound of approaching hooves pulled him from his thoughts. Sheriff Amos slid down from his horse, dust coating his boots. The sheriff wasn't a man to waste words, and Ethan's stomach sank before a word was said. "Ethan," the sheriff began, scratching his beard, "you got one more week on that note with the bank. After that, they'll take the land." Ethan swallowed hard. "I know." Amos hesitated, then glanced toward the road. "There might be another way." Ethan stiffened. He didn't like the tone. "What way?" The sheriff cleared his throat. "Mrs. Margaret Hollis." Ethan blinked. Everybody in town knew Margaret. She was 42, twice his age, widowed nearly 10 years. Her husband had been a cattle trader with money and land enough to keep her comfortable, though she managed most of it herself after his passing. Folks respected her, even admired her grit. But what did she have to do with him? "She's been looking for companionship," Amos said carefully. "And she made it known she'd be willing to help a man if he were willing to give her a name again. You marry her, Ethan, and she'll see that note paid." Ethan felt his face heat. "You mean she wants a husband bought with land?" Amos's gaze hardened. "I mean she wants security, and you want to keep the Turner Ranch. It's a fair bargain. You ain't got another choice." Ethan's gut twisted. The idea of standing beside a woman twice his age, of townsfolk smirking behind their hands at the sight of them, it stung his pride raw. But he thought of his father, buried on the hill behind the house, and the promise he'd made to keep the land in the family. He hung his head. "Tomorrow," Amos said simply. "She's agreed." The next day, the church pews creaked with gossip. Ethan stood stiff at the altar, sweat trickling down his neck as he waited. His boots felt too big, his jacket too tight. He avoided looking at the townsfolk, though he could feel their eyes on him, weighing him, mocking him. Then the doors opened. Margaret Hollis walked in with her head high, a figure of quiet dignity. She wore a simple navy dress. The rains didn't come. Summer stretched on, hot and merciless. Dust hung in the air so thick it stung the eyes and settled on every surface of the Turner Ranch. The cattle grew restless, ribs showing beneath dull hides. Ethan spent his days riding fence lines, searching for any patch of grass that hadn't been burned away by the sun. Margaret worked beside him, sleeves rolled up, face bronzed from the long hours. She never complained, not even when her hands blistered from hauling buckets or her back ached from the endless chores. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity she'd shown on their wedding day. And Ethan found himself depending on her more with every sunrise. It was a late July evening when trouble struck. Ethan had just finished driving a small herd back toward the creek when he noticed movement near the south pasture. At first, he thought it was strays, but then he saw them. 3 men on horseback, their saddles weighed down with rifles. Rustlers. His stomach clenched. He was outnumbered, and with the herd so weak, even one night of stolen cattle would ruin him. By the time he reached the yard, Margaret was already there, calm as stone. She had the rifle her late husband had left her, steady in her hands. "They'll come for the cattle," she said simply. Ethan shook his head. "I won't have you in the middle of this." But Margaret only leveled him with that unflinching gaze. "This is my land now, too, Ethan. My fight as much as yours." Something in her tone left no room for argument. The rustlers came after nightfall, thinking the ranch would be asleep. But lantern light blazed from the porch, and Ethan stood tall with his Winchester, Margaret at his side. "Turn back," Ethan called into the dark. "You're not welcome here." One of the riders laughed. "A boy and his old woman? You'll hand those cows over if you know what's good for you." Ethan's jaw tightened. He could feel Margaret's presence beside him, not a burden, but an anchor. Her rifle never wavered. You take one step closer, she said evenly, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. And I'll put you in the ground. I've buried one husband already, and I've no fear of burying again. The men hesitated. Something in her voice carried weight, the kind that came not from youth or bluster, but from living, enduring. After a long pause, the riders turned their horses, muttering curses as they disappeared into the dark. Ethan let out the breath he'd been holding, his hands trembling. He turned to Margaret, awe in his eyes. You saved the ranch. She gave him a small smile. No, we saved it. The weeks that followed bound them tighter than any vows could. Margaret brought order to chaos. She found buyers willing to pay fair price, traded canned goods for hay with neighbors, and even coaxed Ethan into attending Sunday service again. She softened his edges without dulling his strength, steadied his temper when hopelessness gnawed.